This is The Real Deal, where real estate meets real life. Whether you're a seasoned real estate expert, a first-time home buyer, or if you're simply passionate about hearing small business stories, this is the podcast for you. Join us as we dive deep into the world of real estate and beyond.
Today's episode is brought to you by Stratton Inspections. Stratton covers the entire valley. They do residential home inspections, commercial, multi-unit, and new build phase inspections. For all your home inspection needs, please reach out to Stratton Inspections. Welcome to episode 46 of The Real Deal, where real estate meets real life. I am your host, Janine Igliane, with my co-host, Ryan Hatcher.
What's up, guys?
And our guest today is Dyanna. Dyanna is a marriage and family therapist. She runs her own practice, and we're going to talk about some, I think, really relevant things that are going to be super helpful to our listeners. So welcome, Dyanna.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being with us. So we like to start our podcast off, and we just want to hear about you. Where did you grow up, and how did you get into this business? And yeah, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and I moved here about 10 years ago. When I was in my undergrad, I had an interest for like relationships, how people talk to each other, how they relate to each other. It's so fascinating that, you know, individuals from completely different backgrounds, different families, being raised differently, like come together in relationships and expect it to be like super easy to figure things out, and it's just not. Sometimes it's really difficult. So I had an interest in that all the way back in my undergrad. And then when I moved to Arizona, I pursued 2 different master's degrees so that I could continue to work with families and couples.
Two different.
Yes,
wow.
So family and human development, and then marriage and family therapy.
Okay.
So specializing in couples and relationship counseling. I did my internship and I did all of that stuff, and then I decided I wanted to go on my own and open my own practice. And I love it. I love working with couples and families and just trying to tease out some of those complicated relationship dynamics. And yeah, it's what I love to do. So I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so we love, because a lot of what we do, we're a small business. So we want to, if you don't mind, like kind of touch on that. What made you decide to open up your own practice, and what does that look like?
Yeah, so it was a really interesting learning curve, opening up your own small business.
I'm sure.
Trying to figure out all of the business side of things. You know, I'm really good at peopling. I'm good at the relationship stuff, but then you also have to learn to be really good at the numbers and the accounting and the, you know, how all of those things work. So fortunately, in my internship program, I got to observe a lot of what billing looks like and how all of those little moving parts go together. And so I decided I didn't want to be in a practice working for somebody, because I knew I could do it on my own. I knew that I had the skill set, I had the knowledge to grab all of those things, embrace them, and put them to work for me. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't want to have to do that for somebody. I wanted to do it for myself. If I'm doing all of the hard work, I'm doing all the, you know, I have all the blood, sweat, and tears and the investments and all of that stuff. Like, I wanted to have the return on that.
Yeah.
Like, I wanted to stand on my own.
How scary was that?
You know, hindsight's 2020, right? It was a little bit scary knowing that I was going to be completely like on my own, but I think I was more excited, nervous than actually just scared, because I knew I could do it. Like, I was confident. I knew that I could do it. I could pull it off. I think the most exciting part was knowing that I could do it on my own. Like, you know, in therapy, whether you're a professional counselor, MFT, there's so many different routes you can go. You can work in like community behavioral health. You can work in private practice, group practice. There's so many options to go. And I think that some programs don't properly set you up for what that's going to look like. And so a lot of people might want to play it safe and go into a group practice under a bunch of other people and let them sort of, you know, guide you through the process. But I knew that I could do it on my own. Yeah. I knew that I could figure it out and that I would be just fine.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
That's a lot like real estate, in that people don't understand. I think, I want to be a realtor, sell houses and all of that, but there's a business. You're running a small business when you're a realtor, and so kind of navigating that. And I heard that you were like, you know what, I'll figure it out. I'm going to jump in and I will make it happen. And I love that. So that to me tells me you weren't afraid to fail and make mistakes and kind of learn along the way. So Absolutely. You've been doing this for 10 years now, you said?
So I've been on my own in private practice since 2021. Okay. I've been practicing therapy since 2019.
Okay. And you focus specifically, we were reading a little bit about you, so on couples.
Yes.
And so marriage therapy, things
Yes.
like that.
Yeah.
Also teens, right? Some teen counseling.
Yes. I love working with teens too.
Do you? Okay.
Yeah.
And then infertility as well.
Yes, absolutely.
So tell me, I mean, I'll let you pick. Which one do you want to start with?
Well, relationships themselves, like it's so complicated. There's so many facets to that,
Yeah.
right? So high conflict couples, that's something I specialize in. Communication, intimacy, both emotional and physical intimacy. The infertility piece is really important because there's so much that couples go through that is not the medical side of things when they're going through infertility treatments, and sometimes there's just not a lot of support. Like you have your REs, you have your doctors, nurses, like all of them, taking care of your physical body,
Right.
but couples go through a lot. It's really heavy, and sometimes feels really dark when you're in that roller coaster of the infertility journey.
Yeah.
And sometimes it feels very hopeless, and sometimes there's a little bit of internalized shame and guilt because you're experiencing
Right.
that. And so it's a lot for couples to navigate through. And I knew about 14 years ago, I was going through my own infertility struggle. And so when I came out the other side of that, I was like, this is something I want to make a difference with. This is something I want to help make an impact with, so that people know that like it's going to be okay. Like
I love
whatever
that.
the outcome is going to be, like you guys are going to be okay. You guys are on the same team no
Yeah.
matter what happens. You know
I
what I
love
mean?
that. I love that because I think there's so much when you're struggling with infertility, you're focused on the outcome.
Absolutely.
You're focused on what is the doctor telling me to do? What are the medical things I need to do to make this happen? And nobody is helping you with the emotional side. And I could imagine, right? Like you said, there's some shame that comes with that. Maybe there's some blame that comes with that, right? Feelings of resentment, frustration, sadness, what's wrong with me, all of that. I could just totally imagine this just array of emotions. So to have you to walk them through that is really powerful. And probably people don't think about that ahead of time. Like, hey, we might want someone to walk this road with us.
Definitely.
To help us.
Yeah, absolutely. People don't think really about it until they're in the thick of it.
Right.
You know
and
what I
then
mean?
they're starting to have those feelings towards each other.
Right. And it's like, oh man, we're going to bring a child into the world. Like we're already having all these difficulties. And it's like, hang on, let's take a step back for a second. Look at this objectively. Like you guys are going through a lot right now. This is a huge adjustment. There's so much of intimacy that's impacted by the infertility journey because like so much is timed. Like so much is like timing, you know what I mean? And that's sort of like can take some of the intimacy out of it, right? The spontaneity out of it, you know what I mean? But so much of it has to be timed. And, typically, unless it's, male factor, the woman's going through the majority of it, or the one getting poked with the needles and all the invasive testing and all of those things. And sometimes there's a little bit of resentment. And she's not really like feeling super intimate either, or wanting to be touched really. I mean, those injections, they cause bruises and they cause so many different physical symptoms, and she's just not, feeling it. And then sometimes he can feel like, well, what about me?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like I'm here too.
Yeah.
And so typically it's when those things start to arise, or even after the baby's born, and then maybe postpartum kicks in, then it's like, okay, we have this whole mountain now. Like let's pick this apart and see where this started.
I love that. I love that you do that. And I hope people listening, if they're on that journey and struggling, that they would reach out to have someone walk through it. I love that.
Do you find when you're meeting with couples that they wish that they had done it and come to you a long time ago?
Oh, totally. In general, / infertility, like no matter what it is, research suggests that couples wait 7 years on average when they start having issues in the relationship to get help. And so 7 years is a long time.
Yeah.
That's a lot of things to untangle, a lot of resentment that's built up, a lot of conflict that's happened, you know what I mean? A lot of life adjustments, kids, homes, all of those things that happen along the way. And so, there's a lot of couples that use counseling sometimes as like a last ditch effort. You know what I mean? Like, okay, things are really bad. We're on the brink of separating. Like, let's try couples counseling, right? But what I wish people would consider more frequently is like, it's an investment in your future together, right? It's not like a last ditch effort, because if that's what you're using it for, if 7 years built up at the very least, like it's going to take time to, unravel all of that. But if you sort of front load those things, even in premarital counseling, like let's go through values. Let's go through how we want to raise our kids, religion, where we want to live, money. Like that's 50% of what couples, have conflict about, right?
Family involvement.
Absolutely. Like all of your family values and things like that. Like all of those things, again, are issues that typically come up later. You know what I mean? When there's a conflict.
Do you find that the premarital counseling is as effective?
Absolutely.
Is it? Okay.
Absolutely.
Because I've heard that they don't know what they don't know, so it's not as impactful as it is once they're married for a year or two, and they're like, oh, okay, this is real.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's a sort of a time frame there between premarital and then when you start having conflicts, right? Because a lot of times people just assume like, if we're having conflicts, we'll figure it out. And then it's been like 3, 4, 5 years, you know what I mean? And then, hey, we've never actually had the conversation about how we want to raise our kids. Like, I want to use cry it out. Well, I don't agree with that. And then it's like, okay, well, these were things that, we could explore beforehand before we even get to that place.
Which that brings me to my next question, which is who and when should you seek marriage counseling? Like, who's the ideal candidate to meet with you?
People who are like newly engaged, or even people who are considering getting engaged, like just exploring some of those things before they make that leap, before they make that commitment. There's couples and couples counseling that aren't engaged, or they might see it in their future, but they still find value in trying to figure out how each of our own individual experiences, like our family of origin, trauma, things like that, all play a role. Our attachment plays a huge role in the way we communicate with each other. If we know those things now, we can sort of not predict, but kind of see down the line how that could potentially be an issue later if we don't figure it out now.
Why do you think people wait 7 years? What's the reason, you think?
Well, I think there's a couple reasons. I think sometimes people just assume that, like, we'll figure it out, like it'll pass, it'll be fine, something will be fine. We'll just sweep it under the rug and it'll be fine. I think that's part of it. I think the other part is, while I think we're getting better in our society overall, there's still somewhat of a stigma on couples counseling, right? And so people that go to couples counseling might have this idea that, like, oh, we've failed, or there's something wrong with us, or, oh, we've had to resort to this because we can't figure out our marriage by ourselves. Yeah. And that's not it at all. There's two complicated human beings with different backgrounds that are navigating these things for the first time in a long-term relationship. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, and you said it earlier, and I've heard this before, that some of the greatest source of frustration comes from unmet expectations.
100%.
So having the opportunity to have some of those conversations up front, it kind of maybe can help avoid some of those unmet expectations. Absolutely. Where you can lay it on the table, like, here are my expectations, and this is reasonable, this isn't, and then maybe kind of navigate ahead of time.
Absolutely. Yeah. Unmet expectations and uncommunicated expectations, like, both people fail. If I have an expectation of you and you don't meet it, well, I'm upset because you didn't meet my expectation, but then you're also upset because you're like, I don't know what I did or didn't do. You know what I mean? And there's two different types of expectations in any relationship. There's implicit, which is like implied. And those are usually like the big ticket items that we don't talk about a lot, because it's like maybe assumed, we're having a close relationship, or we're not going to, like, hurt each other, things that, like, we don't often pick apart and talk about. It's the explicit ones that often get us in trouble.
Like what?
Roles and responsibilities in the household. What is the plan for having children? What is the plan for parenting children? Whose role is it going to be to cook dinners and go grocery shopping and shop for the kids? And, like, all of those things that so many couples have conflict about because they never talked about it.
So can I ask you along those lines, because as you're talking, I'm thinking, I bet, now tell me if I'm wrong, I bet that a lot of that comes from how we grew up.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So we tend to model that from what we experience as kids, or go the complete opposite of what was modeled for us.
So either you what is it, subconsciously expect the way that your mom was or the way that your dad was, that's not how your spouse is going to be.
Absolutely.
And when that doesn't happen, it can lead to frustration, or it's, I'm never going to be like my parents, and so I'm going to do it this way.
Man,
absolutely.
We could talk all day about this. I totally agree.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's all Ryan will say.
Yep, I'll just leave it at that. No, we've been married for 18 years, and so there's lots of things to work through and figure out. But one of my best friends, he and his wife almost got a divorce And they go every week. It's been probably a year since then. They go every week together, and he swears by it. He says the best thing, and he calls it an investment. He goes, this is the most important relationship you'll ever have. Why do people not invest in it? And he goes, we should have a long time ago, you know? So
I love that. Yeah. I mean, I know Ray and I have done counseling at various times in our marriage, and it's always been super helpful. But I think something that you said is never to feel like, okay, we've arrived, like we're good. No, like it can be an ongoing thing, right? To just help flush through some of those communication stuff.
Definitely.
And you know, I love like the idea, going back to how we were raised, if we're even aware of that, it can be so helpful for giving each other grace. You know, I was raised in a very affectionate home. My husband was raised in an unaffectionate home. And so we come into the marriage, I'm expecting him to show that. Right. And it was, I remember when we like had that conversation of like, oh, okay, I get it. And then both of us were able to give each other grace, right? And able to like, okay, and I had to understand that's not his natural style. And he had to understand I need to up that and like consciously make an effort in this way, right? And so it kind of helped us.
Yeah, absolutely. It's easy to go into the blame game with that, though, right? It's like, why are you not more physically affectionate with me? Am I asking for too much? Right. You know what I mean? Yeah. And then once we have an understanding of like, not only our family of origin, how we were raised, but like also attachment. And attachment plays a huge role in that. Like our relationship with our mom, our dad, our caregivers, you know what I mean? And our current relationship, all of that plays a role. And when that comes to light, when you understand what attachment looks like, it's like, oh, that makes so much sense. Yes. This actually isn't a you thing or a me thing. Like this is a thing that we can like attack together. I have a better understanding of why you think the way that you do, and like that's okay. We just have to figure out a way to recalibrate and renegotiate with the terms here of the relationship. And to your point about, you know, two people coming from different homes, you know, in terms of like affection, physical affection, stuff like that, there's also an inherent gender difference there too. You know what I mean? I like to think, again, that we're getting a little bit better with this next generation raising kids, but typically, historically, you know, not all the time, but boys largely are raised with like, you know, I'm going to give you something to cry about, rub some dirt in it, don't be such a girl, stop crying, you know, that's too girly, don't do that. Right. Very inconvenient to have those feelings, you know what I mean? Everyone around you is just like telling you to make yourself smaller, just be quiet and stuff it down, you know what I mean? And then on the flip side of things, not all the time, but a lot of time, girls are raised with like, oh, it's okay to cry, like let's have some ice cream and watch movies and like it's gonna be okay, you know what I mean? We'll just cry all day and watch, you know, chick flicks, you know what I mean? And so those two people get together in relationships and they can't understand why they don't align on emotional expression. Well, I learned from a completely different book than you did. And there's nothing wrong with you. That's what you learned. That's what you were conditioned to do. And once you sort of take that blame or that shame or guilt off of that, then it's like, okay, like it's okay, it's fine. Like let's figure out how to navigate this differently so that you understand that like your feelings are fine. They're not inconvenient. In fact, like she wants you to show them more. You know what I mean?
Oh, I love it when my husband shows emotion.
Absolutely. Like it's an ultimate like emotional intimacy sort of connection. Like without it, the other sorts of intimacy just sort of can't take place either.
Yeah. So what would you say when it comes to marriage, like some traits of a successful or maybe happy is a better word, happy marriage?
Intentional time, and not just spent together, but also spent separately. Our own individual self-care is so important. And if we allow our partner to enthusiastically support us in doing that, that means so much. You know what I mean? You know, if you both have a whole calendar for the month and you each have your self-care day and then you have your 2 date nights in there, you can see it's coming up. It gives you something to look forward to, but it also gives your partner an opportunity to be like, hey, I see that you're going golfing with your buddies this weekend. That sounds awesome. Where are you guys going to go? You know what I mean? Like kids and I are going to stay here and watch Bluey and eat goldfish until we throw up. You have a great time. I've got this under control. You know what I mean?
That's fantastic.
So intentional time together, but also separately, and really having open, calm communication about your experiences, you know what I mean? Like how you're feeling. Life gets busy, especially when you throw in a couple kids, businesses, all of those things, and you like to get directly to the point, you know what I mean? You didn't take the trash out today. Okay, hang on a second. Like tone matters. And if you start any sentence with you towards your partner, it's probably not going to get the response that you want. You know what I mean? They're probably just waiting for you to stop talking so that they can have their reaction back to you. You know what I mean? So being able to trust the consistent response with whatever you're bringing up. So if I can trust that you're going to be calm and considerate when you come to me about something, you can trust me that I'm also going to be calm and considerate. That doesn't mean that I have to love what you're saying, but I can say, okay, I don't love that, but give me a few minutes. I just need to process that for a minute. You know what I mean?
When you're talking, and this probably is I have some deep-seated issue, I don't know, but it just, what's coming to mind is like the ability or making it safe to have some of those difficult conversations, right?
Emotional safety.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love that. Okay, let's switch gears to teens, because that's another area that you focus on. Both Ryan and I have teenagers, so what can you tell us about that? Like, where should we go with that?
So teenagers are so much fun to work with. I really do enjoy working with teens. You know, some teens go to counseling because their parents are making them, right? And some go because they want to, which I'm seeing a lot more of, which I love. I think it's fantastic.
I love that too, yeah. That,
you know, kids are now growing up with more emotional intelligence and wanting to learn more about their feelings and things like that. So I think that that's fantastic. But for the other teens that are coming to counseling, like maybe like against their will, you know what I mean? I really just love meeting them where they're at. You know what I mean? I find sometimes one of the more difficult aspects of working with teens is sometimes the parents' expectations. You know, sometimes parents, you know, bring their teen to counseling and they're like, okay, I need you to like fix it, you know? And I'm like, well, there's nothing to fix here, but like, let me find out like what's going on, you know what I mean? And if there's a poor counseling experience where the teen feels like the counselor's not on their team, is not on their side, and they're just going to go report back to their parents, that experience is going to impact them for the rest of their lives. So when they do get into a relationship and their spouse says, hey, I think we should do couples counseling, they're probably going to say, oh, no, I had a very negative experience with that when I was a teenager, and I don't want to do it, because all they do is like, you know, break confidentiality and told my parents everything that I said and all of that, right?
Can't trust them.
So with teens, I like to make very clear with the parent in the room that like everything is confidential. You know what I mean? The only limitations are, you know, if they're going to hurt themselves or somebody else. Outside of that, like, I'm not going to tell you anything. You know what I mean? And sometimes parents get a little like prickly about that, because I understand they're paying for sessions, you know, they're paying for their kids to go to counseling and stuff, but like, if my relationship with them is damaged and they don't trust me, I'm not going to get anywhere. You might as well just have them show up here and play games all day.
What are the common things that teens are struggling with that you find?
Anxiety, pressure to achieve academically. We're 4 years out now from COVID, but during that time, there was a lot of social anxiety from being isolated, a lot of depression from being isolated. That's why we did see a bit of a spike in teen suicide rates during that time. A lot of peer pressure to be a certain way, look a certain way, social media influences, you know.
What are your, on those lines, like what are your thoughts on social media and how that affects? I feel like, kind of back to COVID, and really this generation is almost like an experiment of trying to figure out how is social media going to impact them. Because I think during COVID it like dramatically changed, and we saw like a huge increase in social media, but we don't know truly like what are the lasting effects of that. So what are your thoughts on social media for teens?
We don't know what the long-term effects are going to be yet, but what we do know is that there is an increased risk of depression, self-harm, suicidal ideation for teens that use social media. Because, you know, years ago in previous generations, if kids were going to bully you, they did it at school. You know, and then you went home and you were fine. You were safe until you had to go to school. But now it's 24/7. It's on your device. You know, they can, you know, smear you all over TikTok or Instagram or whatever. And so you can't get away from it. And that can cause a lot of depression in kids. I can't imagine.
Yeah.
It's really impactful and not in a great way for kids to be using social media. I think a lot of parents have a different school of thought on social media, but I think that having real honest conversations with your kids about the dangers of social media and also the benefits of social media, but understanding objectively that a lot of it's not real, I think educating them is more important than restricting them.
That's a really interesting point. Sorry, Ryan, but just that idea, you just said educating them is more important than restricting them.
Yes.
Do you have like a best practice or any opinion on when social media should be introduced? Or how, or all of that?
I think that's really subjective. I think every parent has, again, their own opinion or school of thought on the role of social media in their kids' lives. But we do know that anyone's prefrontal cortex is not fully formed until they're in their early 20s. So their decision-making process is not going to be on the same plane as an adult. So high school, while is a very complicated, dynamic time for teens, would probably be the time to slowly introduce some of those things. But those conversations should start much earlier. Right. Probably around the age of 10, talking about social media and the effects of social media. You have Roblox, Minecraft, kids games that are kind of an infant form of social media. They can talk to random people. People can message them and, things like that. It's kind of like a baby version of social media. Those are the times to have those conversations about personal safety, not sharing your information, alerting an adult if you see or hear something that makes you uncomfortable. So having those conversations really early on will benefit them later when they're 15 or 16. And if you were to allow them to have like an Instagram or something like that, then they're going to be a little bit better equipped to know what to look for, because there are people out there, there are predators out there that are going after teens, and that's a real fear. It's every parent's nightmare. You know what I mean? So educating them on what's real and what's not, and understanding that there are benefits to social media. That's cool. You get to follow your favorite musicians and influencers and whatever. That's really cool. Keeps you connected to your friends. But just keep in mind that it's all fabricated. It's not real life. Right. That's not what you can expect from real life. And that there are people out there that are looking to take advantage of people, and you need to know what to look for. That's because really eventually you're not going to have that control, right? And so we want to educate our kids now and give them the tools now, because when they're 18, 19, 20, if we restricted them the whole time and said no Instagram, no TikTok, none of that, they're going to get it. They're going to find it. And then they're not likely going to be as safe with it. Right. Because it's just it's like kids that aren't allowed to eat candy. Right. You know what I mean? They get a hold of it and they just go hog wild on it. And that's sort of the same effect.
And I also heard that even if you say no, their friends are going to probably have different rules. So then they're going to be exposed to it that way. So they just, have the conversations, address it head on. I love the idea of alerting them to what's out there, the reality, right? That it's not real. And number two, that there are people that are out there that actually do want to harm you. So you have to really be diligent. And I think that's, as a parent, from my perspective, that's the hardest part for us as when raising kids, is when they start to navigate to letting them go a little bit, right? Where you can't control their every day, every moment. And they are starting to make some of those decisions for themselves and trying to navigate. It's like a fine dance, right? Of okay, how much, how little, how firm, how relaxed can I be? And trusting them. I think that's another big thing. This is just my own opinion, sorry, but I feel like it's important to show our kids that we trust you until you've shown us that you're not trustworthy. And so, here's a little bit of freedom, right? And I'm going to trust that you're going to do well with it, and kind of letting them feel like, okay, my parents trust me. I want to do the right thing. Versus no, I don't trust you.
My youngest is 12 and he doesn't have a phone yet. But he will be in middle school next year, where it's almost a requirement. It's not, but it's used by teachers in the classroom because most kids have them. So he's almost forced to get it. And then the question is, what type of phone? Do you allow the social media? And it's a nightmare.
And how much parental restriction you put on there? How much do you view what they're doing? Because all the phones have different apps where you can oversee what they're doing and how much time they spend.
And they have the phantom apps and all those types of. Not that they all do, but it's there.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that feels scary. There's going to be a certain element that's not going to be in your control of what he's going to do or what he's ultimately going to find or experience. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so just having those really honest conversations about you're not going to be in trouble if you make a mistake. You're not going to be in trouble if you find something like some profanity or whatever on your phone. Like, you're not going to be in trouble for that. Like, I just want to know so that I'm better equipped to educate you, because I want you to hear about those things from me and not from the internet.
Yeah.
So for those that want to have some really good resources to check into besides counseling, for example, what do you recommend for both parenting teenagers and for those that would like to have stronger marriages?
Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of like teen groups and like couples groups. There's retreats. There's things that you can do like that. Teen groups are fun because it's a bunch of kids around the same age as them, experiencing a lot of the same things as them. There are other resources like, you know, school counselors. The benefit of having like your own like counselor as a teen is that someone that like you can build that rapport with, you know, like someone that like you can trust. You know, you have to earn it. And I think that's my favorite part about working with teens is earning it, you know, because I know they're not going to give it to me blindly. But once they understand that once their parent leaves the room, that like all bets are off. Like, you can tell me whatever you want to, and you heard me. I'm not going to tell them anything. You know what I mean? It teaches them also that you don't have to blindly respect or trust anybody. Like, it should be earned until they don't deserve it anymore. And I think that's a really good life skill for them to have, to identify people who have their best interest and identify people who are in the best interest of someone else.
I love that. Dyanna, this was so good. What didn't we ask you that we should have asked you?
I don't know. I don't know if there's anything, you know, related to like couples and teens that we didn't cover. But again, I would just like to reiterate that it's not a failure, and it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you or there's anything wrong with your kid, to have a place to just explore and just untangle all of those things that sometimes don't come up until later in adulthood, things that have happened like in our own childhoods and things like that, trauma, that we've sort of just like dissociated from and put into a box and, you know, pushed under the bed.
You may not even know you have.
And sometimes like things just trigger it and we don't understand why, you know. So just having a place to do that with someone that you trust, whether it's in person or telehealth, having somebody consistent that you can build that rapport with is like 90% of the therapeutic experience.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Before we end, for anybody that's interested, that's thinking maybe this is a career that I want to go into, like what should they do? What should they look into? What would you say? Who like would fit this type of a career?
Yeah, I think for who would fit this type of career, anyone who wants to learn more about the human experience and how to relate to people and how to communicate with people differently, and someone who can really align objectively with both parties in the relationship, you know. Something that they'll find is that when you do go to couples counseling, sometimes one partner feels that if the therapist is the same gender as them, they're going to pick sides. You know what I mean? And so if you're going into this field and you have any sort of maybe bias or thoughts that maybe aren't completely 100% even, go to therapy first. And I feel like you should do that anyway, to see what that experience is like and pick up on the experience of things that you liked, things that you didn't like, and then you can sort of like absorb those things and take them with you. And then going through the process of school is a lot. It's a heavy workload, especially if you're working full time and then you're doing internship hours and you're doing your classes. I mean, that was a year and a half of 16-hour days most of the time, and my kids were little. It's hard. It's really, really hard. But give yourself some grace if you can prepare yourself for the amount of time that's going to be invested. Like, try to save some money first. Maybe see if you can work part-time, or if you're, you know, in a relationship, someone that can help support you through that process. It's a lot. It's a lot. And you learn a lot about yourself. Yeah. You learn a lot about yourself just by you going through the process of learning, but also seeing clients for the first time. Okay. There's like little light bulbs that constantly went off for me, like, oh, I didn't think about that before in my own life. Yeah.
I always wondered how the spouses of therapists feel about their marriage, you know?
Well, he's not here to speak, but I can take an educated guess. I have to be very mindful about how I bring up topics and conversations because
he feels like you're working him over.
Right. He's like, don't therapize me. And I'm just like, well, this is just my voice. This is how I talk. But yeah, he would probably say that, while I can provide some helpful insight with like parenting and couples and stuff like that, you immediately lose objectivity when you're in the relationship.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? There's nobody on the outside looking in. I'm already inside. You know what I mean? So sometimes I just have to be
you're probably more
mindful.
emotional too, I would imagine.
Sometimes. I've learned just through like my own education and doing therapy and things like that when to personalize things and is this really about me right now? You know what I mean? And that's a struggle for anybody, you know what I mean, is recognizing like, is this a direct attack on me or I'm going to stay in my lane. This is about you right now. Like, let's see if we can figure this out. You know what I mean?
It's so similar to real estate because a couple things that, number one, even for me, when I bought my last house, the house I'm in now, I remember thinking, I wish I had a realtor that was like an independent, third party neutral because I'm emotional, right? When I'm in it for myself.
That's why I had her sell my house.
Yeah. He was very emotional. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, so funny. But then also, again, so much of what we do, sometimes we say this, it's like we are counselors to our clients through the process because it is a very emotional process.
Definitely.
And so trying to keep them level-headed in all of it, and we can see things objectively because we are unemotional. But yeah, when they snap or are short, not taking it personally too, right? Yep. Because it's not about us, it's really about what they're going through. So.
Absolutely. It's the same thing in the room in therapy. You know, when somebody is, you know, getting particularly spicy or upset, I'm like, this isn't really about me.
Especially when they're going through a divorce and you're selling the house, it's tough.
Right.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I mean, that's why I'm so interested in this subject, not only for business and what we see on a daily basis, but being married, having teenagers, being a young men's leader at church. I mean, it applies to all of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And emotional intelligence is such a big part of that. So
100%. And that's a choice,
yeah,
right? Like you may have been raised or learned or conditioned certain things, but at some point you can make the active choice to say like, I want to learn more and I want to understand things differently. And if I'm having a particular reaction, typically like anger or frustration, like where is that coming from? Because anger is just like the bouncer for all the other emotions. You know what I mean? He stands in front of everything else. So like if I can just not be angry for a second, can I allow myself to feel something different? And what is that? You know what I mean? Being able to identify the emotion and then what to do with it.
Yeah.
That's
you know
so
what
good.
I mean?
I've always heard that anger is a secondary emotion,
Absolutely.
right? So I love that you said that. And that's a great piece of advice to sit. And if you're feeling angry, where is the root of this? Like stop and
I'm not just angry.
Right.
Maybe I'm like
scared,
sad, or I'm lonely, or I'm scared, or like any of those emotions that,
hungry.
you know, are not hangry, right? That aren't easily retrievable for some people who weren't raised with the consistency of knowing that your feelings are convenient, like they're totally fine. Yeah. And so we just stuff those down, but anger is totally fine. Anger makes us feel completely in control, but it's not actually like the root of what's going on.
That's
we actually just talked about this the other day in our meeting. We're reading a book, and I brought up this principle I learned. It's called HALT. You are often tempted to act in a way that you shouldn't or will regret when you're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. And I've always remembered that. Now, remembering that in that very moment is sometimes hard, but it's a good little principle to think about.
Sure. Yeah. Those are all ways to be dysregulated.
Yeah.
And anytime you're dysregulated, there shouldn't be any sort of logical conversation, because logic and reason, like they go out to lunch when you're emotional or dysregulated. And that's the time to stop a conflict, right? Like we don't have to power through this thing right now because we're upset. We can take a break and commit to coming back to this later, but come back to it. Otherwise your partner's not going to trust you the next time you say that you're going to come back, right? But we don't have to power through this thing.
Or you'll have scar tissue.
That's good.
Or that.
Yeah.
Or that.
Well, this was awesome. We like to end with like a little speed round. So just rapid fire questions. Are you up for it?
I'm here for it.
All right. So we'll start off easy. What's your favorite color?
Red.
Favorite food?
Tacos.
I love tacos. Favorite drink?
Ooh, that's a hard one. Probably Igliane New.
Oh, yeah.
Any flavor.
I love Alani's. Do you have a favorite book?
Ooh, gosh, my brain went immediately to professional, but then I was thinking about what are some other. I really like Stephen King's It. So scary. So scary.
I don't know if I could read that. I think I would
so
be
good. It's so good though. It's so scary.
It's awesome.
I just can't watch the movie.
Right? Okay. Do you have a favorite podcast?
Ooh, well, I'm a huge Disney fan.
Okay.
And so there are quite a few Disney podcasts that I like to listen
Really?
to.
Like, what do they talk
Yeah,
about?
like the history or background.
Yeah, I love the history ones where they talk about like Walt Disney and like him coming up with Disneyland and the ideas and things like that. I like the ride history, how they built the rides. I love all the history stuff, but then I also like to get the updates, you know, like what's new, what rides are opening, you know, what's being renovated or refurbished, you know, that kind of thing.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Last but not least, do you have a favorite vacation?
Oh my gosh, yeah, Disney.
I was going to say Disneyland, Disney World.
Disneyland is superior
Like
to
the
Disney
OG,
World.
right?
And anyone can come at me if
I
they
agree,
want,
though.
but
Okay.
Disneyland is superior.
You're a super
Aw.
Super fan.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Surprised you don't have any Disney gear on.
Oh, I have my tattoo that's always with me.
there you go.
I love
That's
it.
cool.
And my necklace does say "This is
Okay.
the way," which is, you know, Star Wars, which is Disney now.
I stand corrected.
Yeah, it's always with me. And I have Mickey Mouse shoes on right now.
Well,
I love it.
okay.
So you really are representing. Okay, so if people want to reach out to you, how can they find you?
Yeah, they can go to my website. It's DyannaEiselTherapy.com. You can even schedule a free 15-minute phone consultation on
And
there
it's,
too.
and it's Eisel.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Nice.
And
Well,
Dyanna,
yeah.
Dyanna.
Yes.
Okay.
well, thank you, Dyanna, for being with us and sharing.
you.
And
Absolutely.
we just appreciate you and what you're doing.
you.
So
Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to The Real Deal, where real estate meets real life. Make sure to follow or subscribe to the Home Selling Team on YouTube, Instagram, and Spotify to stay up to date with our podcast.